The coach came down into the valley at dusk, and Allowance smelled the smoke a full mile before the house showed itself. It was the wrong smoke, not the thin blue smoke of a chimney at its work, but something low and yellow and greasy, carrying the reek Allowance had learned to dread in a childhood spent between kitchens and counting rooms, the smell of fat that has caught fire. She put her head into the raw inland air, and where the drive turned through a stand of black elm, she saw the great gray bulk of Caldmere Hall at last. One low wing of it was breathing flame from an open doorway, and the yard before it was full of running men, and the running men were making it worse. "Stop the coach," she said. The coachman had been engaged to deliver a duchess, not take her orders, and did not stop quickly enough. So Allowance worked the latch herself while the wheels still turned and climbed down into the churned mud, and her single trunk and single maid and the whole of her married future rolled on another 20 yards before anyone thought to rein in. She walked toward the fire because not once in all her years had she been able to turn her back on a thing that was being done wrongly. The kitchen court was a square of noise. Someone had formed a chain from the pump, and the chain was doing the one thing that must never be done, flinging water into burning grease. Allowance watched a pail go in at the scullery door and the fire leap up to lick the lintel in answer, because water does not smother fat, it flings it, and flung fat is only fire taught to fly. A footman's sleeve was alight, and he did not yet know it. An old man shouted for more water, in the voice of one who believes a disaster can be ended by doing the wrong thing harder. And in the angle of the wall, forgotten by every soul in the yard, a scullery girl of perhaps 14 stood with an overturned dripping pan at her feet, and the hem of her skirt already a climbing rope of flame, and she was too terrified to move. That was the only mercy in it, for to run would only have fanned the flames higher. Nobody was looking at the girl. They were all looking at the house. Allowance looked at the girl. She did the swift reckoning she always did without knowing it, where the heat stood, where the draft pulled, what lay to hand, and then she was moving. She caught up a horse rug from the mounting block, crossed the yard at a run, and threw the whole weight of it and of herself against the burning child, bearing her down onto the wet cobbles and rolling her. Once, twice, pressing the wool to the flame until there was no more flame. Only the girl sobbing under her, and the reek of scorched cloth and the two of them soaked to the skin. Then she stood, and she raised her voice, and it went out across that yard, flat and clear, and entirely without hurry. "No more water. All of you, set down the pails. You are feeding it." They turned and stared at her. A small, mud-streaked, sooty stranger in a traveling cloak, giving orders in a court that had never seen her face. "Sand," Allowance said. "Earth from the bed there, ash from the cold grates, and wet sacking. Soak those meal sacks at the trough and bring them to me, folded. You," she pointed at the old man who had wanted more water, "shut the far door and the shutters. Starve it of air. A fire cannot burn what it cannot breathe." For one long moment nothing happened, and the fire had that moment all to itself. Then a great raw-boned groom drove a shovel into the flower bed, and the spell broke, and they moved. They banked wet sacking over the burning fat, smothered the flare with sand and earth and cold ashes, shut the doors and choked the draft, and the roar sank to a hiss, and the hiss to a sullen smoke. And then, quite suddenly, into the ordinary dark of an evening kitchen with a great charred ruin at its heart. Bristeford men, it had taken from the moment Allowance left the coach, perhaps 4 minutes. She knelt again by the scullery girl and turned back the rug. The child's ankles were reddened and would smart for a week, but the flames had been beaten out fast and she was safe. "There now," Allowance said more gently. "You held still. That was clever, though it did not feel clever. What is your name?" "Bess, Mrs.," the girl whispered. "Then you will do very well, Bess." It was at that moment, and not one moment before, that the Duke of Weyburn came down the steps of his own house. He came without haste, a tall man in a dark coat, bare-headed, and the noise seemed to arrange itself into stillness around him. He was not old, 32 perhaps, though the set of his face wanted to be older, black-haired, with a hard, handsome, shuttered face and gray eyes that moved over the whole scene and priced it, the way a man prices damage he knows he will have to pay for. The wrecked scullery, the reeking sacks, the sooty servants, and the small drenched woman in the muck with a burned kitchen maid's head in her lap. He did not ask who had put the fire out. He did not ask after the girl. He looked at the ruin of his kitchen court, and something in him closed like a door. "Peveril," he said to the gray butler who had followed him down. He did not lower his voice, and he did not trouble to see whether the stranger in the mud could hear him. "So this is what my grandmother's grand bargain has fetched us from Cornwall. A little brown thing that rolls in the aspit with the scullions on her wedding journey. A pause, cold and even. She will not see out the winter here." And he turned and went back up his own steps into his dark house, and did not once look back, not at the wrecked kitchen, and not at the woman he had married, still kneeling in its ashes. Peveril did not go in at once. A spare, upright man of 60, he had served 3 masters of Caldmere, and had followed the whole of those 4 minutes from the top of the steps without once moving. He looked now at the new Duchess, wringing filthy water from her cloak, with hands that had stopped shaking before anyone thought to notice they had begun, and there rose in him a thing he was far too well schooled to say aloud, that in all his long years at Caldmere he had never watched a grease fire put down by plain sense in place of dumb luck. Anyone who in the same 4 minutes had spared a thought for the burning child. He put the thought away, careful where a good butler stores what is not yet ready to be said, and crossed the rain-dark yard, past the flat certainty of his master's judgment, to lift the young lady's box onto his own shoulder. They gave her a fine cold bedchamber, a fire that smoked, and a supper on a tray she did not eat, and Allowance sat up late that first night with her one true possession, and told herself the truth, as she had learned young that no one else reliably would. The possession was a small brass weight, an ounce measure off a merchant's scale, worn dark with handling. It was her father's, the single thing of his the creditors never got their hands on. She worked it slowly between her fingers, thumb passing over the worn face of it, the way some people turn a coin when they are trying to think. Eloan Penchero had not come to Caldmere Hall to be its mistress. She had come to pay a debt. She had told the Dowager Duchess across the careful and courteous letters that settled the whole match, only the half of her history fit to be shown. She had described herself as the daughter of an old Cornish house, of good blood and slender means, 23, sensible, unlikely to give any trouble. Every word of that was accurate. It was what she left out of the letters that mattered. She had not written that Trevanna, the house she was born in above Fursta, its own grey cove was mortgaged to the slates, that her father, a warm and hopeless man, had poured the family into a copper mine. The sea flooded the year it should have paid and died 3 winters back, leaving nothing but debt. A weak and pleasant elder son who signed whatever was set before him, and a daughter who had kept the accounts of a sinking house since she was 15. That was the part no one was to know. Not the debt. Debt could be forgiven, a proud old name. The other part, that the books of Trevanna, every honest column that had held the creditors off years past the point any man thought possible, had been kept in a girl's hand by one candle, while her brother took the credit in daylight, because a woman known to understand money was a woman no one would marry and everyone would pity. Those years taught her something. She never after put down that numbers hold no opinion of the hand that writes them. They cannot be flattered, frightened, or wept into agreement. A total is right, or it is wrong, and nothing a loud man says across a table will bend a crooked one straight. Allowance had loved the Trevanna books for that cold fairness. Nowhere else in her life did her word stand level with any man's. Then, last spring, the Duke of Weyburn's grandmother, who had known Allowance' grandmother 40 years before, and forgotten nothing, wrote to Cornwall with an offer dressed as a kindness. The Duke required a wife. The old woman required the match. The Weyburn settlement would clear every debt on Trevanna, lift the mortgage, keep the roof over her brother and the tenants in their cottages. In return, the Pencarrows gave up their one unmarried daughter to a man she had met exactly twice, who had buried grief so deep it had turned the whole of him to winter. Allowance had said yes before the ink was dry. Of course she had. You did not weigh a sister's freedom against 40 tenant families and a drowning name. It was the plainest sum she had ever done. But she understood, that first married night, exactly what she was and was not. The county would say she had married a fortune. The truth was the reverse. His money had bought her people out of the sea, and so his money, by any reckoning a proud heart could make, was still his. The allowance they would settle on her, the sums that were to be hers, she would never once feel were hers. She had been purchased at a fair price for a good reason, and a purchased thing does not complain how the house is run. So she would be quiet, useful where she could be, invisible where she could not, her strange unwomanly cleverness folded away where it had always lived. She would give this cold man and his cold house no cause to call her a nuisance. She would outlast the winter he had already promised her, and the winter after that, and she would ask for nothing. She had nearly resolved the whole of it and blown out the candle when Tamsin came in. The one servant she had been allowed to bring north, a black-haired Cornish girl of her own age who feared nothing on land, with something folded over her arm and a strange look on her face. "Mrs." Tamsin said low, "there's a thing below stairs they're all careful not to say, in front of me, and so of course I've had the whole of it in an hour." She hesitated. "There's gowns come to this house, Mrs. Silk. London made, the best, regular every quarter, and paid for out of the Weyburn accounts. Then His Grace has a generous notion of my wardrobe," Allowance said, and did not smile. "No," Mrs. Tamsin's voice dropped further. "That's the thing they won't say. The gowns aren't ordered for you. They never were. They're sent on, sealed, to another lady. And the bills for them, Suki saw the book. The bills are set against your allowance." Allowance sat very still, the brass ounce cold in her closed hand. "Another lady," she said. "Another lady," said Tamsin, "and nobody in this house will tell me her name." Allowance did not go raging to her husband's door that night, or the next. Raging had never carried her a single yard in this life, and she would not try it against a man who had already decided she was a nuisance shipped up from Cornwall. She did the only thing she trusted. She went quiet, and watched, and counted. It took her less than a fortnight to understand that Codmere Hall was dying, and to understand the manner of it. It was a beautiful place, which was the whole pity of it, long and low and silver-gray above its valley, a house that men who knew their business had got right once and left to those who did not. It was failing the way a proud man fails when no one about him will say the word aloud, inwardly, quietly, one shut room at a time. The great chambers of the west front stood sheeted and dark. Damp had crept into the closed passages, which meant rain was coming through a roof somewhere overhead that no one had climbed to find. The plate dulled to pewter gray in its base, for there was no housekeeper to lift and clean it. The old one had died 2 winters back and never been replaced. Good linen, soured, unturned, in the presses. The kitchen chimney smoked for the plain reason that it had not been swept in a year, which was, Allowance thought grimly, exactly how a pan of fat comes to catch. And over the whole of it, holding every key on his own ring and every account in his own hand and answering to no living soul, sat Mr. Brandreth. She met him on her 3rd day, the steward, agent, and man of business all in one, a smooth, well-kept man of middle years, with a mild face and a smile always ready to be spent, the sort who agrees with everything said to him and gives up nothing. He found her in the still room where she had no business being, counting jars. "Your Grace honors us," Brandreth said, smiling, "though I confess I wonder to find a duchess at the preserve shelves. You have only to tell me your wants, and I shall see to everything I always have. His Grace prefers not to be troubled with the running of things since his loss, you understand. He leaves it all to me. It answers very well." "I am sure it does, Mr. Brandreth," said Allowance pleasantly, and set down a jar and read him in that half a minute the way she read a column of figures. He was not angry to find her there. He was afraid to find her there, and he was smiling to hide it, and the fear was the interesting thing. A steward with nothing to hide does not fear a wife who counts jam. "His loss," she said. "I did not know His Grace had suffered a loss." Something crossed the pink face and was gone. "That is not for me to speak of, Your Grace," Brandreth said, and bowed himself out and locked the still-room door behind him with a key off his own ring, though Allowance had been standing in it. She learned the rest from the one account she was permitted to see, the kitchen book, and from the tradesman at the door who had no notion that the small, quiet Cornish woman asking after their bills was anyone worth lying to. And what she learned, penny by penny, all pointed to one standing entry. No one would explain. 4 times a year a great sealed parcel came from a London modiste. Gowns of the finest silk and lace, a lady's whole wardrobe at a stroke, and was sent on the same day, unopened, by the estate cart to a small house called the Ferndale at the far edge of the park, where, the carter told her, yet jareful and unknowing, a young lady lived very retired. Miss Linnet they call her, poor soul, sees nobody. And the whole cost of it, hundreds of pounds a year in silk for a woman she had never met, was entered in Brandreth's fair hand against the personal allowance of the Duchess of Weyburn. Against Allowance's allowance. Bought, the whole county would say, if it ever came out by the Duke, for another lady, out of his wife's own money. She stood in the cold passage with the carter's words in her ears, and there settled in her that old lodged weight she knew too well, the flat certainty that came whenever a set of figures was wrong, and would not lift however firmly she told herself the matter was none of her concern. It was no affair of hers. She was a purchased wife who had promised to ask for nothing. The next parcel came on a gray Thursday in her 3rd week, borne up to her own rooms this once, perhaps by some servant's confusion, perhaps by some servant's kindness. A great flat box, London sealed, her husband's other lady's gown inside it, charged to her name. Allowance looked at it a long while. Then she took up a pen, and across the unbroken seal she wrote in her own plain hand, "Returned, unopened, by the Duchess of Weyburn," and she did not send it on to the Ferndale, as every parcel before it had gone. She locked it away in her own press, whole and sealed, the string never cut, the paper never turned. And when the next came at the turn of the quarter, she did the same, and the one after, refusing every gown, opening none, letting no coin be spent in her name upon a lie she did not yet understand. She did not weep, and she did not accuse. She simply would not open it, and would not let it be said she had. Below stairs, they thought it wounded pride, and pitied her, and lost a little of their bet against her. Brandreth, when he heard, did not smile at all. And in the shut library at the heart of the house, a grieving man was told his wife had turned the gown away with its seal unbroken, and set down his glass, and, for the first time since she knelt in the ashes of his kitchen, wondered what manner of woman his grandmother had fetched him from Cornwall. The summons came on Allowance's 21st day at Caldmere, brought up on a silver salver as though it were an affair of state, which in that house it was. The Dowager Duchess of Weyburn would receive her grandson's wife in the south parlour at 11, and begged her Grace be punctual, the Dowager having no mourning to waste at her age. Adeline, Dowager Duchess of Weyburn, was past 80, and had buried a duke, 2 sons, and most of her own generation, and come out of it not softened but tempered, the way a blade comes out of the fire. She sat by the one hearth in that house that was never allowed to smoke, wrapped to the chin in gray shawls, her back owing nothing to the chair behind it, and let Allowance walk the whole length of the room toward her without a word, so that the walk itself became a kind of weighing. "Sit," she said, when the curtsy was done. "There, where the window is on your face. My sight has grown long, girl, not weak. People muddle the two and live to regret it." She studied Allowance for the length of a slow breath. "You are smaller than your letters. I had looked for a larger woman at the end of so firm a hand. I am the size I am, your grace. It has answered so far. It answered in my kitchen court, I hear. 8 grown men flinging water into burning fat, and 1 Cornish woman off a coach, who put it out with sand and a horse rug, and stopped to drag a scullery child clear before she troubled about my house. My grandson gave me the whole account. He gave it as a complaint." Something moved, far back in the withered face. "I have chosen to enter it under a different heading." Allowance said nothing, and looked as though a confidence would be safe with her, and waited. "I made this marriage," Adeline said abruptly. "You know it. I wrote to Cornwall. I named the figure. I had your father's debts cleared before your brother had done blustering about the family honor. I did not do it for your sake, so you may spare me your gratitude, which I should find tiresome. I did it because this house is going under, and I am too old to bail it, and I recalled that the women of your line have always known the difference between a fortune and a household. A fortune any fool may marry. A household has to be kept. And there has been nobody to keep this one for 2 years. May I ask what happened 2 years ago?" For a moment the sharpness drained out of the old woman, and something older and far worse took the chair in its place. "My other grandson happened," she said. "Lord Corin, Alaric's younger brother, and the warmth of this house, which Alaric never had the trick of being. Corin married where he was forbidden to, a girl of no family and no fortune, and I am given to understand, a great deal of quiet worth. The Duke would not receive her. Words passed between the brothers of the kind that can never be called back. Corin took his bride and went, and the packet bringing them home the next spring struck the manacles off your own Cornish coast in a night fog, and the sea kept the better half of my family. So you will understand I have married my living grandson to the very country that drowned his brother. I know the cruelty of it. I judged it worth the price. He has not forgiven me, and he will not forgive you, and neither is any fault of yours." Allowance sat very still, and his grace has mourned him ever since. My grandson does not mourn. That is the whole trouble. A man who mourns comes out the far side of it in the end. Alaric put out his own hearth the day they buried an empty coffin, and he has sat in the cold of it since, sooner than let any firelight fall on the things he cannot bear to see. His brother's face, his brother's widow, the last hard word he can never now take back. He sets his name to whatever the steward lays in front of him, because signing cost him nothing, and reading would cost him everything he has left. That is his weakness, and somebody under this roof is making it a very dear one, though I am too old and too tired to prove it. The bright eyes came back to Allowance and Pinder. But you keep accounts. Do not waste breath denying it. I have read every letter you sent me, and no woman writes so plain a hand who has not spent years making crooked columns lie down straight. There it was. Allowance felt the floor shift a half-inch under her. I keep a small book, ma'am, she allowed. Then keep a larger one. I cannot give you the keys of this house. They were taken up 2 years since and shut away, and winning them back is a war for another day. But I can lend you my authority, which within these walls is older than any steward's, over the still room, the linen, the kitchen, and every farthing bought and eaten here. Take it, lift the stones, and let us both see what crawls out. The ghost of something like appetite crossed her face. My grandson has told the household you will not last the winter. I mean to make him eat the season whole. You have until Candlemas, Duchess. Do not squander your Christmas being modest. I loathe a modest woman above almost any kind. Allowance rose and curtsied, and at the door she turned and asked the single question she had come, resolved not to ask. Your Grace, the little house away on the far side of the park, the Ferndale. Who is the lady who lives there? Every line of the old face closed over, the way a pool closes over a drop stone. But the Ferndale, said Audlin, is my grandson's business, and I do not walk in it. Neither should you, not yet, and not carrying a candle you are not prepared to be caught holding. Good morning. If Allowance's story has its hand round your heart by now, take a moment to subscribe so the rest of it finds you, and tell me in the comments whether this Duke has earned a wife the like of her. Now, back to Cadmere and the long white winter in which one small, quiet woman took a great house gently to pieces to find what was destroying it. Allowance gave no notice of what she intended, for notice was how proud people came to grief in the open, and she would not hand Mr. Brandreth even the sight of her trying. She took up one small neglected trouble, mended it so plainly no soul could pick a quarrel with the mending, then reached for the next, and let the sum of them make her argument when she would not make it herself. The stores went first, because a larder is a house that cannot lie. She turned out crocks gone green under 2 winters of neglect and meal that moved with weevil, and beneath the plain waste she caught a colder, smaller thing, that the amounts written in the store book and the amounts on the shelves did not answer to one another, and never once erred in the household's favor. She said nothing. She only began, from that gray afternoon, to keep a second and truer count of her own. The linen came next, every press of it, good Holland gone soft with damp, no one had aired in 2 years. What could be saved? She washed and folded away what had perished. She cut down for bindings and floor cloths, for waste was the one extravagance her frugal soul could not stomach. She had the flues of the lived-in wing swept, which stopped the kitchen smoking after a 12-month and quietly shut the door on a second fire before it could open. When the Belwick dairy sent up rancid butter, she returned it down the hill within the hour, with 3 lines in her own hand, mild as a Sunday bonnet and without an inch of give, and the butter that came after was sweet, and the house which had wagered against her began to change its mind without ever once admitting it had. There had been money on her below stairs since her first week. She knew of it almost at once. For a woman the world has always looked past, learns to catch what is said just beyond her hearing. The bet was that the Cornish bride would be broken and gone by the first thaw, and the odds ran long. Even Suki, who had grown fond of her, had ventured a shy 6pence on the frost. Allowance held it no crime. Stepping off that coach into the firelight, she would have taken the same odds herself. She merely set out, without a word, and without the least show of hurry, to see the whole wager lost. Tapp, who had wept 2 years over spoilt joints and a range that would not draw, began to cook again, like a woman with the iron struck off her wrists. Ferris, the head groom, a Yorkshireman who spent words as though they cost him blood, took to touching his hat to her as to a true mistress, after she came out one bitter dawn and told him at a glance that his favorite cob had wrenched a tendon and broken nothing. The younger maids brought her their small sorrows now, rather than swallow them alone. And Peveril, who trusted no creature on the near side of 60, began to bring her the 100 daily questions of a great house that he had spent 2 years carrying, to no purpose, to a study door that never opened. Without a title, without anyone placing the office in her hands, she had taken up the running of Cadmere Hall. The Duke marked the change before he could name it. He did not go near the still room or the linen presses. Such places were another kingdom to him. But he could not help remarking that his coffee reached him hot now, that the passages had lost their reek of wet plaster, and that the small book-room where he sat out his evenings had, one night, a fire that drew clean and warm and did not smoke, as no fire in that room had done since the spring his brother sailed. He asked Peveril whose doing it was, and was told, Her Grace. She had had the whole house swept, and thought he might sit the easier for it. He took the answer and did not order the work undone. It was in that same bookroom, a week later, that he came upon her without meaning to. Past midnight, sleepless, he pushed open his own door and found the new Duchess kneeling on the hearthstone in a plain wrapper, laying his morning fire with her own hands. She had found the room cold and black in passing, and knelt to lay it ready rather than leave the early chill to a housemaid, unbothered by the notion that a grate was beneath a duchess. She rose when she saw him, the kindling still in her hand, and did not apologize, which he could not account for. She met his eye, and held it, not boldly, not meekly, but simply, the way one regards another they have privately concluded is only a man, and a weary one. His servant studied the floor when he passed. His grandmother looked clean through him. This small stranger off the far coast looked at him, and seemed to see the cold he lived in, and to be weighing how much warmth he might be trusted with. It unsettled him past anything insolence could have done. He had forgotten what it was to be seen. "You have people paid to do that," he said. "They are asleep, your grace, and the fire is no respecter of who lays it." She set the last stick and stood. "It will be burning before you wake." He looked at her a beat, longer than the words asked for. "The house is altered," he said, which was not what he had meant to say, and he could not have told what he had meant instead. "It was only waiting to be noticed, sir," said Allowance. "Most things are." Something shifted behind his face at that, and was gone before she could take its measure. He inclined his head and left her to the flames. And Allowance watched the kindling catch, and then went down to the small cold room she had made her own, and opened the plain book she kept there, every article that came to the door of Caldmere, and every true coin paid for it, set down in her own hand, and turned once more to the page where 3 nights running her honest figures had stubbornly refused to come out level with the figures Mr. Brandreth chalked up for the household to admire. The book she kept was a humble thing, a cook's tally, what the butcher brought and was given for it, what the fishmonger brought and was given, week on week, in figures the tradesman handed her at the door with no reason to shade them for a quiet woman in an apron. Her writ from the dowager reached so far and no further, but a house is one body, and a single true pulse, honestly taken, reports the health of the whole. The butcher had 10 shillings a week of Caldmere, and said so to her face, and turned out his own notched stick to prove it. Yet the quarter's kitchen account, when Brandreth chalked it up on the passage-board for form's sake, allowed the butcher 16. 6 shillings a week on one man on one line, walking softly off the foot of the column and out of the house to an owner Allowance could nowhere find. She stood before that board a long while in the cold, touched nothing, and carried her face out of the passage as blank as a wiped slate. But the thing had lodged now and would not shift, and she understood what 6 false shillings in the least book of the house must mean for the great book she had never been let near, the estate ledgers behind the steward's locked door, which on this showing would not survive one honest reading. Her way through that door came not by stealth, but by the dowager. Old Adeline, who missed nothing, had read Allowance' face across 3 weeks of teas, and one grey morning while Brandreth was away at the Belwick rent day, she pressed a folded order into Allowance' hand, sealed with the Weyburn ring. "Fetch me down the household inventory," she said, "kept, like everything worth keeping in this house, behind that man's door. Peveril has a key. He is never troubled to mention to the steward. Take as long over it as the counting honestly requires." And she said not one word more, because none was wanted. So it was Peveril who unlocked the estate office, and Peveril who set a candle on the desk and stepped back into the passage to keep a manservant's silent watch, and Allowance who stood alone among the ledgers of Caldmere, with lawful business there, and a heart going like a hammer. The inventory she had been sent for lay in plain view. She found it, and might have gone, but her eye had snagged on the wrongness one shelf above, not one estate ledger for the closing year, but 2, side by side in matching brown covers where a single book should stand. The near one was scuffed pale at the corners with handling. Its fellow might have come from the binder that morning, the spine scarcely bent, a book made to be shown, and otherwise never opened. She lifted the unworn one down first. It read like a psalm of good management. Every rent gathered, every farthing squared, the estate lean but honorable, the tenants paid to the day, each repair costed and discharged. There she read that the leads over the long gallery had been renewed last autumn at £2.40. She had crossed that gallery not a week since with a pail, catching the wet where it came through the plaster in 3 brown-ringed places. Then she lifted down its worn twin, and the worn twin read like nothing wholly at all. Here were the same rents as they had truly been taken, steeper, holding after holding, than the fair book dared confess. A shilling wrung from a half-blind widow, a half-crown from a farmer whose barn had gone unmended a year, and not a coin of the difference crossing into the book that would be shown. Here were roofs charged out in full and never touched with a tool. Here were the merchant's bills written high in the clean book and paid low in the true, the space between skimmed off each quarter day. And here at last stood the entry she had circled, a month without knowing its shape, a heavy sum charged to her own allowance for the gowns and keep of the lady at the Ferndale, set against in the true book, the far smaller sum that ever really went there. The gulf between them was a modest fortune, and it ran the road all the rest ran, into the steward's own hand. The Ferndale was no scandal. It was the painted screen the theft had crouched behind the whole while, and folded into the gutter of the true book. Soft with handling, lay a half-sheet in a hand, nothing like the steward's, a man's writing, open and sloping and 2 years in the sea. See that she wants for nothing, it said, whatever stands between my brother and me, and beneath it a single letter. See Allowance read it twice and felt the whole story roll over and show its other face. Not a kept woman. Not ashamed to be buried, a drowned brother's last care for the wife his family would not name, kept up in show by a duke too broken to look, and bled quietly white by the man who held the pen. Out in the passage, Peveril coughed once, low and deliberate, and then spoke, raising his courtesy for the benefit of someone climbing the stair beside him. "Mr. Brandreth, we looked for you tomorrow, sir." The steward was home a day early, and coming to his own door. Allowance did not hurry, for hurry leaves fingerprints. She set the true book back exactly where it had stood, spine squared to its neighbors, took up the inventory she had lawful leave to hold, and was ruling a placid line of figures when Brandreth came in with the cold of the road on his coat. "Your Grace." He was smiling. The smile kept its lodging on his mouth like a tenant who paid no rent, but his glance went past her to the shelf and to the 2 brown books upon it, and came back to her face. "You are early at your labors." "Her Grace of Weybourne sent me for the inventory," Allowance said, level as still water, and turned the book so that he might read it. "The linen is a sorry tale, a house of this size, and hardly a dozen whole pairs of sheets in it. I find nearly everything at Caldmere counts up short, Mr. Brandreth. The closer one looks, the shorter it comes." The smile held its place upon his lips and quietly deserted the rest of him. And Allowance, drawing a straight rule beneath a column with a hand that gave away nothing at all, understood 2 things, in the same breath, that she now knew enough to ruin him utterly, and that he, watching her sit so steady at his own desk, had just understood that she knew it. Her hands kept faith with her until she gained the turn of the stair. Only there, out of his sight, did they at last begin to shake. Brandreth let a week go by before he came to her, which told her something. He liked a fear to thicken before he tasted it. He chose the linen room, a gray hour when the maids were at dinner, and drew the door to behind him with the particular care of a man who wishes the closing noticed. "Your Grace wears herself out," he began, warm as a fire kept on another man's coal. "A duchess on her knees to a sheet count. It unsettles a household. It puts notions in the servants above their station. It puts an honest number in my book, said Eloan, not lifting her eyes. I sleep the sounder for the honest number. Honest. He turned the word over as though it were a coin he suspected of being light. There is a deal of honesty about your grace of late. Then let me be honest in my turn, one hired man to another, for that is what we both are. Whatever gold you wear, Caldmere is old and wide and full of dark corners, and a lady set down in it from 200 miles off, without a soul of her own blood nearer than the sea, does well to keep to the sweet and harmless side of a house, the still room, the presses, the rooms that smile back at her. She does very ill to go turning up questions that can pay her nothing but sorrow. The dowager is old. When she is gone, so is the borrowed weight of all who leaned on her. And a wife who has made herself a nuisance may be put quietly out of a house, so quietly no one hears the gate, and followed, and named, and taught to wish she had stayed at her mending. It would grieve me past words, your grace. I should like you to understand how it would grieve me. There it lay between them, turned face up like a played card. Eloan looked at him a long, level moment, and saw again the thing she had begun to count upon, that under every soft syllable the man was frightened, and that it was the fright that had carried him in here, because a woman with a slate and a long memory had lately come to stand a foot too near his locked door. You are very tender of my welfare, she said, but I have only the one gift, Mr. Brandreth, and it is numbers, and no one living has ever talked me out of it. I shall not learn the trick from you. Good day. She said it lightly, and meant every word, and her hands held true until the door had shut and his soft tread had faded. Then she sat down on the edge of the linen chest and found that her knees had privately given her up. She did not carry it to Alaric. 3 nights she turned it in her hands, and 3 nights she talked herself out of it. And the reasons were sound, which was their danger. To bring it to him was to be a bought stranger laying a charge against the one man he had propped his whole grief against for 2 years. He might take her word, or the steward's, and if he wavered so much as an evening, she was finished. And there was a crueler cost. To speak was to force the Ferndale open, the one door he could not bring himself to walk toward, and set her own hand to the tearing. And beneath, the high reasons crouched a low one, and she made herself look square at it. She was afraid for herself. Speaking would make her the most stared-at woman in 3 counties, and to be stared at was the one thing she had fled since girlhood, when she balanced a drowning house's account in secret and prayed the world would not notice how. So she took the middle way, the coward's way, with cleaner linen, and dressed it up as patience. A rumor any smiling man could laugh into the fire. She would not hand him one. She would raise instead the one thing no smile can shift, the truth in plain ink, a coin of proof at a time, built up until it was too heavy to lie away, and while she raised it, the widows would go on being pared thin, and a broken man would go on setting his name to his own robbery, the toll of her care, paid with her eyes open and no pride in the paying. Yet something in her had shifted for good. He had come to frighten her into silence, and had shown her instead the exact dimensions of his own fear, and no man wastes a threat on a woman he is certain can do him no harm. She lasted 9 days. Then the dowager, who saw a great deal she never spoke of, set a basket of calf's foot jelly and a twist of good tea in Eloan's hands, and remarked without lifting her eyes from her needle, "There is a sick lady at the Ferndale whom no one in this house will trouble to visit. You have strong legs and no foolish airs. The path leaves from the yew walk. Put on your stout shoes." And she looked up, once, and there was an entire instruction in the look that her mouth chose not to speak aloud. So Eloan went on a still white afternoon at the very end of the winter, down the yew walk, and across the frozen park to the small gray house at its farthest reach, and knocked, and was let in by one weary maidservant, and came face to face at last with the lady. Linnet Wayburn was 24 and wore the years harder than that, and had plainly once been lovely, and was lovely yet, in the guttering way of a candle burned near its socket. She rose from her small fire with a curtsy that cost her breath. The cough had been in her chest all winter and meant to stay, and said, "Your Grace does me too much honor," in a voice that had been trained, somewhere and long ago, to gentleness. And in a low chair by the hearth, bundled in a shawl that had been turned more than once, a boy not yet 2, looked up at Allowance, out of a face she knew, for it was the face of the man she had married, made small and made soft. "This is Kit," said Linnet, and her whole tired body curved toward the child the way a hand cups round a flame in a draught. "Christopher, for my own father." She hesitated, and then surrendered the rest like a thing she had guarded too long. "His other name is Alaric. Corin would have it so, to the very end he would have it so." He said a brother stayed, a brother, whatever bitter words had passed between them, and that the boy should carry his uncle's name forward into a gentler season than the two of them had ever managed to make. "I have never found the nerve to tell His Grace. One does not press a gift on a man who has bolted his door against you." Allowance sat in that cold, clean room, with the Duke's living nephew warm against her knee, and the whole shape of it came clear to her, and she was ashamed down to the root. Here was the entire contrivance, and nothing clever in it, only something patient, raised out of the goodness of decent people. A broken man who would not look. A proud young widow who would not trouble His Grace, who blessed his name for a bounty 3 parts stolen before it came near her boy. An old woman worn past the fight, and a Cornish wife too careful of her own comfort to speak. Every one of them behaving well, and in just the manner that let one patient man with a key drain a house, a widow, and a fatherless child slowly white. "Have you enough?" Allowance asked, her voice not quite level. "For the winter." "For the boy." "His Grace is goodness itself," Linnet said, and believed it to her marrow. "The fine things that come, I have never had the heart to wear them. They are far too grand for a life like mine, so I send them to be sold toward Kit's keep. And we manage. Kit has his milk." She smiled, and coughed, and smiled again through it. "Tell His Grace we do very well. I should hate for him to be troubled on our account. He has sorrow enough of his own." Allowance walked home through the gathering dark with the empty basket over her arm, and the child's face printed on the inside of her eyelids, and somewhere between the frozen park and the yew, walk her own fear simply left her, or rather she found it had shrunk to too mean and shabby a thing to keep a room in her, set against what she had seen. All her life she had made herself small and unseen, so that no harm could find her. She understood now, with the cold, clean certainty of a column that comes right at last, that there is a line past which keeping oneself safe is only a soft name for keeping out of it, that a person who can halt a wrong and will not, for dread of being seen, has joined that wrong as surely as if she had signed her own name at the foot of the page. She was done being safe. She went home to raise her case in deadly earnest, and this time she raised it to be shown to the world. She raised it the way she had always kept accounts, slowly in her own hand, one true figure after another, while the hard winter loosened into a wet green spring. Under the honest cover of settling the kitchen, she gathered the tradesman's own reckonings, the butcher's notched stick, the chandler's day book, and the corn factor's tallies, and copied each fare. And she wrote, too, to the London dressmaker, glad enough to send to Duchess the true bill for gowns that Duchess kept returning unopened. She had Widow Trewin and 2 other overcharged tenants set their crosses to a plain sworn note of the rent they truly paid. The office was barred to her now, but she had stopped needing it. She built the true books from the outside in, from doorsteps and tally sticks and the crosses of honest folk, and wherever her figures met his, the daylight between them told the tale. She kept the fare sheets in a seam unpicked and restitched in the lining of her cloak, and added to them each night behind a bolted door, for a case half made was more dangerous than none. And as the case grew, without either of them meaning it to happen, she and the Duke grew to know one another. It started with the book room where he sat out his evenings, and where she came now on this errand or that and was, most evenings, bidden to stay. They spoke of small things, and then larger ones. He proved, at closer quarters, exactly what the old woman had named him, not a cold man but a raked-over one, with a dry buried wit and a great tenderness gone all to grief. He spoke of his brother once late with the coals low. He gave the people he loved his own names for things, the Duke said, to the ash and not to her. A boat once, that I warned him was too slight for the crossing he meant to chance in her. He weighed a shut book in his hands. I was right about the boat. I have never yet managed to be glad of it. We fought over a marriage I had no right to forbid, and I sent him into a sea fog with a cruelty for his last word from me, and the water did the rest, and for 2 years I have signed whatever is set before me sooner than open a ledger kept in his hand. He raised his eyes. They tell me you run this house on my grandmother's warrant. The truth is, you run it on your own. Why? It was the one question she could not answer in full without unspooling all the rest, so she gave him a single true thing and held the rest back. Because a good house should not be left to rot for want of tending while the people who love it stand about helpless, she said. I was raised where nothing could be spared, your grace. It left its mark. I cannot watch a good thing thrown away, a house, a harvest, a person, and not itch to save the sound of it. It is the closest thing I own to a fault. Something very near warmth crossed the shut face. I am beginning to suspect, he said, that it is the closest thing you own to a virtue. It was the old dowager who made the matter plain in the way the very old do, which is to consult no one. She took Eloin one May morning to the still-room door, where a great iron hook had hung bare for 2 years, and where a ring of house keys, a dozen and more, worn pale, with 2 centuries of turning, now hung upon it once more, back in their place. These went off this hook the month Corin drowned, the old woman said. Brandreth shut them in his office, and named it Prudence, and my grandson was too deep under the water of his own grief to see the lie of it. Whoever carries the keys of a house carries the house. I have won them home. Spare me the asking how. I am 81 and keep my own counsel. They are yours, on you, at your waist, in the open, where every soul here can hear which hand turns them. Her bright eyes came up hard, and on the day a hand reaches to take them from you, and one will keep your fingers closed. Eloin lifted them down. They weighed more than she had looked for. She wore them from that hour, and the small, cold chime of them went ahead of her through every passage of Caldmere, and week upon week the sound stopped being a stranger's, and became the house's own. The noise of a place that had recalled it was a house and no longer a vault. She was wearing them. The June morning, Mrs. Drusilla Cardew arrived. The Duke's widowed cousin came up the drive in a hired chaise with 3 trunks, and a great parade of family feeling. Come, she declared, to comfort poor dear Alaric in his affliction, as she had come every summer since the drowning, a handsome, hard, quick-eyed woman of 35, born to a great deal more than a dead husband and a shrinking jointure had left her. Her design was the near twin of the steward's. To be the power at Caldmere, if not its duchess, for the Duke's eye had never once turned to her that way, then the hand behind its shut door. She had thrown in with Brandreth years since her little county debts, smoothed quietly away down the same channel that fed him, and in exchange she eased his path and asked no ugly question. Neither could have stood alone. Within a day she had marked the swept flues, the honest accounts, the small brown Cornish woman moving through the house with a housekeeper's keys at her hip, and understood at once, being cleverer than the steward, that something had taken root while the pair of them looked elsewhere. And inside the week she had seen what he never troubled to look for, that the wife was not only able but concealed, and a woman who conceals is a woman with a seam, and a seam can be picked Penscato, was it before you married?" "Of Trevanna," she began, sweet as warm syrup over the dowager's tea. "One hears so little of Cornwall, quite the world's end, is it not? And your late father a mining gentleman, I think. How enterprising." The bright eyes did not follow the mouth into its smile. "I do puzzle how a girl from a foundered little estate at the edge of nowhere came to manage a great house so well. Where does a lady come by such a head for figures? It is not the usual thing, not, forgive me, altogether a comfortable thing in a wife." "Then you keep a sharper ledger than I do," said Eloin mildly, "for I never got the knack of totting up people. Linen is a good deal more in my way." And the dowager from deep in her chair let slip a small, dry noise that a coarser woman would have let become a laugh, and Drusilla Cardew, smiling still, put the whole exchange away in her memory, and that same night sat down and wrote the first of several letters to a cousin married to a North Country attorney. The letters took 6 weeks to bear, and bore on the worst morning they could have chosen, the very day the Duke had at last been driven, by his grandmother's flat command, to sit a little county company down to dinner, the first at Caldmere since the drowning. Half the neighborhood rolled up the honey-colored drive that evening to see whether the Duke of Weyburn had rejoined the living, and to take the measure of the Cornish nobody he had married unseen. Drusilla picked her ground like a field marshal. She let the cloth be drawn, and the room grow warm and full and watchful. And then she set down her glass and said, into a lull, with the fondest possible show of reluctance, "Cousin, I have wrestled a fortnight with my conscience over whether to speak, and my conscience has beaten me, for I could never forgive myself if this family came to harm through my silence. It touches her grace." She turned her bright face full on Allowance, and every candle in the room seemed to tip toward the two of them. "I have made a little inquiry into the north, for the household's safety only, and things are not as we were told. Her grace is no gentle creature fallen on hard times. She is a woman who ran a bankrupt estate with her own 2 hands for 7 years, who bargained with its creditors, and kept its books like any clerk in a counting house, and took great pains to breathe not a word of it to this family before the settlement was signed. And this same practiced woman has spent these 3 months, by her own servant's account, copying his Grace's private books in secret behind a bolted door. She let it drop like a knife laid softly on a cloth. One does ask oneself why. A woman who hides what she truly is to work her way under this roof, and then goes creeping through her husband's ledgers by candlelight, and creeping too, I am told, down the yew walk to the Ferndale, where she has not a particle of business. One does wonder, cousin, what she is playing for, and whose creature she truly is. And Brandreth, waiting soft-footed at the door for exactly this, chose that instant to add his grieved might, all reluctant fidelity. "I had prayed I might never say it, your grace. Ah, but I have come on her twice at my office after dark. I could not bring myself to accuse a lady. A steward is only a servant. Yet a house may be robbed by more than one road, and a clever woman with a head for sums and a secret behind her is not, perhaps, the wisest keeper of your keys." It was very prettily done. In the space of a minute, they had turned every true thing Eloin was inside out, her competence into cunning, her caution into deceit, her 3 careful months of proof into the very crime she had labored to lay bare. And they had done the one thing she dreaded above all, hauled the Ferndale up into the bright, crowded room, spread the Duke's rawest wound before the whole staring county, and made his wife the hand that did it. Lowen looked at Alaric and watched the thing she had feared since the first wet hour of her coming move across his face. She watched him go cold, watched the warmth of 100 banked evenings gutter and the ash close back over the coals, and saw him decide, in the ruin of that instant, that he had been played, that the one person in 2 years who had met his eye without flinching was only one more clever pair of hands in his money, and a liar about her very self. Exactly as his cousin swore, the door she had spent a spring coaxing ajar swung shut behind his eyes, and the chill off him was worse than any rage. Every face in the room had turned to her, and Eloin, standing among the wreck of the evening with her keys gone silent at her waist, met a strange and enormous discovery, that she was not afraid. It is an odd business to spend a life dreading a single hour, to walk into it at last and find the dread gone clean away, like a coat carried so long you forgot you had leave to set it down. All her life she had made herself unseen in the name of safety. And here she stood, seen to the bone before the whole county, her husband turned to stone against her, and no roof had fallen, no floor had opened, and there was nothing left to fear, for the worst had come and she was still, past mistaking herself. She set down her glass. "Every word my cousin Cardew has told you of my history is true," she said, and her voice carried across the hushed room clear and even, and in no sort of hurry, and every meaning she has hung upon it is a lie. Would you care to see the difference, Your Grace? I can lay it out inside the hour. I have the whole of it upstairs. She waited for no permission. It was the one thing that room had no notion how to give her. She began with herself, for the evening had taught her that the only road out of a lie about who you are runs straight through the middle of the light, where you stand up and are, without apology, who you are. I am Unopened, and all my cousin says of Travana is true, she said. I kept my father's books from the age of 15, and held his creditors off years past the hour any man believed it could be done, and let my brother wear the credit of it in daylight, because a woman known to master money is a woman the world will neither marry nor respect, and I wished, heaven forgive the smallness of it, to be married and respected like anybody else. That is my whole great secret. I hid that I was able. I have finished hiding it. Make of it what you please. Then she turned from the staring county to her husband, and spoke to him alone, as if the crowded room had emptied to the two of them. Yes, I have copied your accounts, 3 months of them, behind a bolted door. My cousin has that quite right, and here is the piece she left out. I copied them, because they are false, and I could prove it no other way. She had sent Tamsin up at the first stroke of Drusilla's attack, and the girl came in now with the cloak in its unpicked seam, and Allowance drew out the fair sheets and laid them along the cleared table, honest page after honest page. Your Belwick butcher takes 10 shillings and is charged to you at 16. The leads over your long gallery were made new on paper last autumn for £42, and have never been touched. I have stood beneath them, holding a pail. Widow Truan's rent was lifted a shilling last Michaelmas for mending. No man has ever come to do. It is all here, sir, in the tradesman's own hands and the tenant's own marks. It reaches back the better part of 2 years, and it comes to a very great deal of money, and every coin has run one road into one pocket. She squared the last sheet. And now the Ferndale, since it has been spoken of in this room and cannot be unspoken. There is no mistress at the Ferndale, Your Grace. There is your brother's widow, and there is your brother's son. The room drew one breath, the Duke drew none at all. His name is Christopher, Allowance said, softer now, and only to him. His second name is Alaric. Corin gave it him at the last, so that your name might carry on into a kinder time than the two of you ever contrived to build. His mother has never dared bring you word of him. She wears her shawls twice turned and blesses your name for a charity robbed 3/4 bare before ever it reaches your brother's child, too proud to complain, too loyal to add a feather's weight to your grief. She took a breath. You have been paying out of what this county calls my allowance to keep your brother's boy alive, and the man who kept your books has taken the greater half of it every quarter and dressed the theft up as a scandal about gowns, gambling that a grieving man would never look and a bought wife would never dare. I turned every gown away with its seal unbroken because I would not be shamed in silence, nor spend a farthing on a lie I did not understand, and I kept them, every one. Cut one open, sir. The dressmaker folds her true bill inside the wrapping. Set it against what Mr. Brandreth charged to my name. The gap between the two is the measure of the man. For the length of one heartbeat, nobody in the room stirred. End quote. Then Brandreth laughed, a soft, mild, comfortable little breath of a laugh, and he knew before it had cleared his lips that it was the ruin of him. For a man may bluster at a rumor, but no man on earth laughs at a true account with the proofs of it lying open on the cloth in front of him. "Lay them out for me," the Duke said. They were his first words, and they were not for the steward. He bent to the pages, and Peveril was sent for the 2 brown books, and the sealed gowns fetched from the Duchess's press and slit, the dressmaker's honest bills coming out of the wrappings one upon another like drawn teeth, and the Duke of Weyburn read the whole account of his own undoing in under 5 minutes. Grief had never once made him slow. When he stood straight, his face was terrible, and for the first time in 2 years, wholly awake. He looked at Eowyn the way a man looks who has been long under water, and has only now felt gravel under his feet, and shoved himself toward the light. Then he turned to his steward, and his voice did not lift. If anything, it fell, low and level the way the sea draws back and goes quiet before the tide turns. "You lifted my brother's keys off their hook, and called it prudence," he said. "You took the bread from his son's mouth and painted the theft as my sin. You let me think the worst of the one soul under this roof who was telling me the truth. You will be off Codmere ground before these candles are out, and before the Belwick bench by midday tomorrow, and every figure she has set down will stand at your side. What you can give back, you will. What you cannot, you will answer for, as the law answers men of your kind. Peveril, see him gone, and watch his hands while he packs." Brandreth went. There was, at the last, nothing else on earth left him. At the door he turned once, and every trace of the sweetness had drained out of him, and he looked at Eowyn with a hatred that had not a smile left anywhere in it. "You could never once let a thing lie still, could you?" he said. "No," Eowyn agreed. "Waste and I have never got on, Mr. Brandreth, and you were a very great waste of a good office. Good night." That left Drusilla Cardew, who had sat out the whole slow unmaking from her chair in the window corner, upright and handsome and perfectly still, watching the engine she had helped build come apart board by board in the candlelight. When the last of Brandreth's tread had died, she rose, too proud to hear her sentence sitting down, and made her last throw with the nerve of a gambler staking the coat off her back. "You will make a fine show of casting me out now, I don't doubt," she said to the Duke. "The poor cousin who let the steward settle her dressmaker. I knew where the money came from. A woman with 100 a year, and no husband knows the parish of every shilling that reaches her. Cast me out, then. Out to what? A hired room and the charity of women who once curtsied to my mother. You have never once lain down uncertain of the roof over you. I have, more nights than I mean to count. I never raised a rent, never touched that child's milk. That was another hand than mine. All I did was grow tired. 15 years tired of being the poor relation at the foot of every table, and I reach for the one warm house within a portionless widow's reach by the only door such a woman has ever left. Pity me or condemn me, cousin, but do not stand there astonished. There is no riddle in me. I am afraid and have been afraid so long the fear has worn a groove I cannot climb out of. You have not the first idea how wearing it is." And there they were. At the bottom of it, the plain animal fright, under the hard, bright shell, laid out on the same table as everything else that night. The Duke's face had set to flint, and Eowyn watched him draw the breath that would be just, and she knew that justice, tonight, would be the finish of Drusilla Cardew. Turned out disgraced, the county told, the widow's cap fixed on for life. "Your Grace," said Eowyn, "let me." He turned to her, and let the sentence die unspoken, and bowed his head, for he had learned that evening what her judgment was worth. Eowyn crossed to the terrified, straight-backed, spiteful woman who had set out that evening to destroy her, and did not gloat, for gloating is the one thing a tormentor comes braced to receive, and she had never yet handed a tormentor what they were braced for. "You took the estate's money through Brandreth's hand," she said quietly, "and that is theft, and we both know the word for it. Yet you never lifted the Trowan's rent. You never took the boy's milk. That was a different hand. What you did was watch, and take your share, and hold your tongue, which is the very thing I did myself from the day I found them out until this one. So, I am the last woman here, fit to see you ruined for it." She held the terrified eyes. "There is a cottage on the Bellick Road, dry and sound and empty. 100 a year would keep a woman in it with no mistress above her and no wage beneath her, and she might in time lay some of that weariness down. If his grace consents, it is yours, not as a kindness for me. I want no thanks. Take it, because a house that has thrown a thief out of doors by midnight has no business making a beggar by morning." Drusilla only stared. Whatever she had steeled her whole hard self against, it was not this, and this unstrung her where justice would only have stiffened her spine. Her face broke once, and reset, and the word came out of her raw, with no grace left in it at all. "Why? Because I have sat in the cold room myself, Mrs. Cardew, and been told to be grateful for the draught," said Allowance. "Go to bed. It is very late, and you are not so far past mending as you believe yourself tonight. There had once been a great midsummer night at Caldmere that was Corin's own. The one evening a year the shut room stood open, and the county came up the drive into candlelight and music. There had been none for 2 years. Now the dowager gave out from her chair that there would be dancing again before the harvest, and that Allowance should open every sheeted room and burn every candle her grandson would grumble at the price of, and pay for, without a murmur, since a house that has learned again to breathe ought now and then to be let to dance. So Allowance opened the rooms, struck the covers, folded back 2 summers of shutters, banked the gallery with early roses, scoured the sconces herself so the flames burned clean. For herself, she let out one plain gown of dove gray, and wanted nothing finer, having never come to Caldmere to be admired. She was admired regardless. She stood near the head of the gallery close on midnight, seeing the supper safely in and forgetful of herself entirely, when the Duke of Weyburn crossed the whole crowded length of the room to reach her, and the county watched him cross it, which was the point, though she did not grasp that until afterward. "They will have a 12-month's talk out of this," she said low, when he had come to stand before her. "Let them talk. I have spent 2 years teaching this county to gossip of my sorrows. It can spend 1 summer learning to gossip of my sense." One corner of his mouth moved as at a thing half forgotten. "I took you for a bargain, Allowance. My grandmother's bargain, struck over your head to clear a debt and quiet a dying name. A mean beginning for the best thing that ever came up my drive. So hear me. The debt is paid and paid. It stays whatever you decide tonight. You owe this house nothing. You are free to keep it or to leave it and be sought by any great house in England for the woman who saved mine. You have no need of me and never had." He held out his hand. "There, before the whole staring room which was not done. That is the whole reason I ask. Not for the house's sake. It has had its mistress since the hour a soaked stranger smothered my kitchen fire with a horse rug, for my own. Because I should like to live the rest of my life under the eye of the one soul who was never for a moment afraid of me. Have me again, freely, of your own choosing. Or refuse me and stay and keep the house I could not keep myself and never raise it again. From tonight, every word is yours to speak." The gallery had gone entirely still. The candles, the roses browning in the warm air, 2 years of shut rooms standing open to the summer dark. She raised her eyes to his. Into her mind came the drenched yard, and the burning child, and the little brass ounce that was all of her father she had carried north, and the long years she had spent making herself too small and too quiet for anyone to trouble to look at. Safe was a thin word. She had had safety her whole life. She had been truly seen for one spring only, and it had nearly cost her everything, and it was the one thing in her whole history ever worth the cost. Alaric, she said. She had never once spoken his name, and the gallery heard her speak it, and so did he, and something crossed his shuttered face worth more to him, plainly, than the whole estate and the country under it. You may take that for a yes, spelled out plain. Since I have learned your grace now and then wants a total read to the last figure. I am very weary of holding my tongue. I will have you again, of my own choosing, and gladly. The ghost of a smile slipped past her guard. There is one term, name it, that you never again in your life put your name to a page you have not read down to the foot of it. I keep the books now, but I will have your word on that. The Duke of Weyburn laughed aloud. The length of the shining gallery, a sound not a soul in that county had heard from him in 2 years, and gave her his word and his hand, and the neighborhood drove home with a year of talk in its pockets, and for once it was the warm kind. By high summer no one in the district would call the thing anything but what it plainly was. The gallery leads were made good by the Belwick man for the £42 they honestly cost, not a farthing over. The rents came fair into one true book in Allowance's hand, and every shilling Brandreth had wrung from the tenants was reckoned up and carried back cottage by cottage. What could not be got from the man the Duke made good from his own purse and thought cheaply spent. Brandreth answered to the bench, and after that to the assizes, and his fall brought Elowen no gladness, only the level quiet of a sum, after long trouble set straight. Drusilla Cardew took the cottage on the Belwick Road, and did not soften all in one season, but she came up when Elowen asked, and found she had more gift for ordering a still room than for watching other people's missteps, and took that over whole, and the two reached, if never friendship, the level peace of those who know what it weighs to go without, among their own kind. And Linnet came in from the Ferndale at last, she and the boy, on a warm evening when the Duke walked the yew-walk, himself to fetch them, unwilling to send a servant on the one errand he had refused for 2 years. He knelt in the doorway to the height of the child, and spoke his nephew's name, both the boys' names, and the boy, afraid of nothing, laid a fat, warm hand on the Duke's wet cheek, as if to learn what a grown man's face was made of, and the Duke of Weyburn, who had not wept beside an empty coffin, wept then, once and thoroughly. Kit grew up at Cowdmere with his uncle's name and his father's laugh, and the great house was full again and loud with it, which the dowager pronounced the one condition a house of that size was ever bearable in, and she lived 3 summers more to see it hold. Late on a warm night that first summer, Alaric went looking for his wife, and found her where some part of him had known she would be, in the book-room by the low fire, the one honest ledger of the estate open across her knee. She was not reading it, only keeping it company, the way one sits beside a thing that has come good at last, after long wrong. You have put the whole place to rights, he said, pausing in the door. There is not a broken thing left in it. What will you turn your hand to now, Duchess? She raised her face to him across the little fire, level and gray and unafraid, just as she had met his eyes out of the wet gravel on the very first day, when he had assured his butler she would not outlast the winter. Oh, something will offer itself, she said. It always does. I have yet to meet the house that could not be bettered, or the waste I could bring myself to leave be. You will remember, it is my one true vice. And you are standing in a cold doorway again, Alaric, letting all the good warmth out. Come in and sit down. He came in and sat. The fire settled. The house breathed on around them, honest and full and warm, a house that had held its breath a very long while, and had that summer been let at last to loose it. She had come to Codmere meaning to disappear, to be safe, to owe her whole small, careful life to a bargain struck above her head. She had ended the most openly known woman in the county, and had found, to her lasting wonder, that she had never once been safe in all her years of hiding, for a thing that is bought is only kept, while a thing truly seen is, in the end, chosen, and that is the one wealth no locked office and no smiling thief can ever carry off.